All right, what is up, y'all? It's Alina back for another video, and in this one we'll be diving into the 5 things you need to know all about this May 30th full moon in the mutable air sign of Gemini. We'll talk about why this full moon and the time surrounding it can really be a great opportunity for us to learn more about and reflect upon our communication skills, critical thinking, information exchange, and a lot of the themes surrounding the sign of Gemini. Also, random announcement, if any of y'all are going to Lightning in a Bottle, which is a music festival out here in California, hit me up because I'm gonna be going and I want to try and organize some type of meetup situation, but we'll talk more about it at the end of the video. All right, why is this moon so important? As many of you know, the new moon marks the beginning of a new lunar cycle, where as we see in the sky, the moon is not visible. None of the sun's light is reflecting upon it. And just as we see in the sky that the moon is at its lowest energy, so too can we be reminded about the vital power that rest and reflection can have on our overall journey, just like the lunar cycle. Now is an optimal time for setting intentions for the cycle ahead. And this is why many people do new moon rituals, where they set intentions, and just as we see the light building in the sky leading up to its peak at the full moon, so too can the momentum around the intentions that we set at this time grow. Now, in general, when we see new moons in the sign of Gemini, we see a lot of energetic support within the realms coming from both the moon and sun because they're conjunct right now. So they're in the same sign. They're really working together energetically, supporting us within the realms of critical thinking, information exchange, intellectual connections, sharing, exchanging, learning knowledge, and really honing and developing our communication skills. And considering that Gemini's ruler planet of Mercury is actually currently in retrograde, which we'll talk about later on in the video, there will definitely be a lot of emphasis relative to communication is what I'm getting. Communication, travel, and being way more conscientious of those areas of our lives, especially when it comes to this retrograde aspect and a lot of the transits that we'll discuss. Gemini is also considered one of the most social and malleable signs out of all the zodiacs, and I might be a little bit biased because I am a Gemini. That's right, for any of y'all who've been rocking with me, you've been rocking with a chaotic and very creative Gemini this whole time. But what's really interesting about this time and the coming of Gemini season is that there's a lot of energetic support when it comes to really reflecting on how we connect with one another. As it is a mutable sign, there's a lot of themes of learning how we enter different spaces, how we may or may not be malleable in those spaces, how open are we to learning from different perspectives and being open to that, and really being connected with creativity, fluidity, and not necessarily too much structure to the point that we're kind of cut off from the world. Okay, next, what transits impact this new moon? One of the biggest transits we see is with Mars in a tight conjunction with Jupiter. So we first see Mars, this planet of courage, energy, and assertiveness, coming together with Jupiter, the planet of optimism and expansion. And a conjunction in astrology really indicates strong blending and support of both astral bodies involved. So there's a lot of supportive energy going on between that assertiveness realm and that luck, that expansion, that optimism. Right now, we really can tend to feel or notice more people feeling more confident, having more charisma, and really more easily seeing a lot of our own value, the things that we bring to the table. When I think of this stuff, I think of myself and how I get kind of nervous in social situations and how sometimes I'm able to kind of tap into like, you're that girl, Alina. Don't forget who you are. You know, it's that type of energy that can naturally flow at this time, but it is still Mercury retrograde. Mercury does impact our communication skills, so it still will be really important to bring that conscientious nature into how we bring things across, really double checking our emails for spell checks and a lot more. We'll dive into that in a second. Next, let's talk about this Mercury retrograde to kind of set the stage for the next transit that I'll talk about, which involves Mercury and Saturn. For any of y'all who didn't already know, a retrograde means that from the vantage point of us on Earth, planets might appear to be spinning backwards in space. And believe it or not, around 80% of the year, there's always at least one planet in retrograde. So while they do have big impacts on our lives, and Mercury retrograde is like a super big deal, it's important to remember that they're very common things and they play a role just like the different seasons that we have here on Earth. All these different retrogrades play subtle, roles in our lives as well. In fact, right now, we actually see that Pluto is currently in retrograde from April 29th all the way until October 8th in the sign of Capricorn. So we've been in retrograde season, baby. but a little bit more on Pluto later. And retrograde planets in general often spark deeper introspection and inner dialogue. It's more of an internal sort of experience specific to the planet and the sign that it is currently transiting at the time of that retrograde. And this generally shows up through said retrograde kind of shaking the table, shaking up our day-to-day lives. I like to describe most retrogrades as almost like a stress test where we might experience shifts or challenges within the specific realms of our lives that that planet or astral body impacts, that aids in our overall development, our overall growth in this life. Now, Mercury, as mentioned before, it impacts the way that we communicate, think, and travel. It's also an air sign, so many consider it to highly dictate our electronic devices, which is why many people say, back up your electronic devices. But the overarching theme and lesson behind a Mercury retrograde is really just for us to slow down. It's really about us bringing more conscientiousness, more attention to detail into those areas of our lives, because it's oftentimes when we aren't paying enough attention to them that mishaps happen. It's usually when we think, oh, I've done this a million times, or oh, they got it over there, that something might pop up to really remind us, hey, it's really important for you to be conscientious in this area. So that's why they say like, oh, double check your signatures, don't start business deals, maybe don't travel, all this stuff. I feel like it's almost like fear mongering within the astrological community, because like you get more clicks if you freak people out about Mercury retrograde. But in reality, depending on where Mercury lands in your chart for the time of a retrograde, what sign it's in as well, it's currently in Taurus, it might not even necessarily be that serious as much as it is just kind of like slowing down and bringing more attention to detail within those areas if you feel called to do so. By the way, everything I'm mentioning relative to Mercury and Pluto in retrograde and all of the planets in retrograde and how they impact our lives can actually be found in the Auralign Astrology Planner. So at the beginning of the planner, there's actually a whole write-up of the top astrological events and how each impact our lives. And if that's something that interests you, we're still having a great sale, so be sure to check out the site. Next up, one of many transits that we see right now with Mercury, we see Mercury squaring Saturn. Now this can be kind of a tough aspect to kind of deal with, as square aspects really indicate a lot of friction between the astral bodies involved. The energy that they bring together really are not mending. And usually if we try to do things within these realms, we might experience more roadblocks than normal. So we see Mercury, this planet of communication, information exchange, squaring off with Saturn, this planet that's often called the strict teacher, that really brings in the energy of maturity, being very kind of like by the book. Right now, because we're seeing a lot of these roadblocks that might involve you needing to bring in a lot more maturity, a lot more sternness, a lot more restriction and consistency to the table from Saturn, when being blended with that communication, with that connection, with that learning aspect, it will be very helpful to bring in more of your attention, being more slow when it comes to typing up those emails. If you have any contracts happening right now, if you might be in some type of collaboration with others and you're like, oh, I got this, let me chill. No. It might be helpful to double check all the assignments, double check what you send to one another, how you're coming across, to avoid any type of miscommunication, because under this type of transit, some of that can arise. And finally, since I already mentioned it, let's talk a bit about Pluto retrograde. Now, Pluto in general impacts the ways that we experience power, pleasure, death, and renewal. So when in retrograde, it can often have an even bigger impact in our lives because it's more likely to kind of shake up the different structures that we already have in place, kind of waking us up to reflect upon those areas of our lives. When I think of Pluto, I often think of that saying that you can't have a breakthrough without a breakdown. I don't know if I fully identify with that, because I feel like I have had breakthroughs that didn't have to involve suffering necessarily, but it is through kind of looking behind the veil of the curtain sometimes in our lives and kind of seeing behind there that we really realize the patterns that we might be, taking on, the patterns that might even be unconscious in our lives that are really kind of driving the ship of our lives sometimes. And oftentimes it isn't until we're kind of shaken out of that routine that we actually stop to think about the fact that we have a routine. Comment down below if you get what I mean, but that's really what's coming up for me relative to Pluto in retrograde. And it's in the sign of Capricorn. It's really in this sign that's all about structure, infrastructure, material gain, you know, really about being a work type of person. A lot of Capricorns are really focused on their work. They're really able to kind of like have work-life balance, more leaning so on the work side. So seeing that Pluto is in this sign, it's in retrograde, we're getting these potential lessons within this realm from the end of April all the way to October. It might be helpful right now during the new moon or whenever you find the time between this period to kind of reflect on those areas of our lives. Like what aspects of us are subconscious and conscious? Like what aspects of our actions that we've taken throughout our lives or over this period of time in the spring and the summer were a result of us consciously wanting to do it or potential subconscious programming that we've done for a long time. What comes to mind when I talk about this is on one side of the spectrum, self-sabotage, where we sabotage ourselves, where we maybe have an opportunity or something good going in our lives, but for some reason we don't feel comfortable. On a subconscious level, we don't necessarily feel safe. It isn't familiar. It's outside of our comfort zone. And so we self-sabotage to break away from that. And in our conscious minds, we're like, I self-sabotage. This is probably bad. And then on the other side of that spectrum, there are many people, and I feel like everyone has this depending on what aspect of your life, where something amazing happens to you and you're kind of like in the back of your head, you're like, of course this happened. Of course this did. Where you already have deep rooted an expectation of your life or of a relationship or of an environment to be fantastic. And you stop one day and you think, wow, this is fantastic. And you didn't even have to consciously get to that space. It was just something that deep down you knew, like, of course, like I deserve this. And I feel like there are aspects of our lives within many of those realms, and a lot of it on one side can be rooted in trauma, you know, things that happened long ago where we're not fully used to something, but we say that we want it consciously. And really doing that shadow work, this Pluto energy, I feel like can really bring that up right now. And on the other side as well, looking into that, exploring that, and really celebrating ourselves that we were able to work towards something and not necessarily have as many like conscious or subconscious barriers to get there. All right, ways to align with this energy. Now for this specific Gemini new moon, considering the Mercury retrograde, how much Mercury is really involved in this period, I think right now will be a beautiful time to reflect upon how we communicate with one another, how we connect with one another, how our perspectives are when it comes to being open-minded to new perspectives, how we learn from one another. Do you consider yourself a teacher, a student, both? And which one is stronger than the other, depending on which area? All right, let's dive into these new moon journal prompts. What I'll do is I will project the questions, the prompts on the screen. I invite you to pause the video, write them out, and at the end, we'll come back. If you have your Auralign astrology planner, you can go ahead and flip to the new moon ritual page to write everything out. But if you don't have it, you don't need it. All you'll need will be a pen and paper. Moving into this new lunar cycle, do you have any new intentions or goals? Reflecting on the previous lunar cycle, what challenges or highlights stand out? How did you respond to them? When you are alone with no distractions or people, how does your body and energy feel? Is there anyone or community where you feel the same way? What is a pattern or habit that you've noticed about yourself in social situations? Where does this stem from? All right, I hope you enjoyed those writing prompts. And what I'm gonna do is answer a few of them so we can kind of catch up and to spark some conversation. So a really big highlight from this previous lunar cycle is that we were able to travel to Bali, which was an amazing experience. We went to a bunch of different areas of Bali, including Ubud, Canggu, Seminyak. We were able to go snorkeling. We went to a monkey sanctuary. I tried to learn how to surf and I failed miserably, but I feel really inspired to go back. It was a beautiful experience. It was so nice to really learn more about Balinese Hinduism. And very interestingly enough, Balinese Hinduism, and I think Hinduism in general, they place a large amount of emphasis and attention on the new and full moon. And they actually have ceremonies circling or centered around them. So that was really interesting. And I also was able to meet some of y'all in Bali, which was crazy. I met two amazing souls, one named Shannon, another named Sean, and we were able to connect and talk about our lives. And I just felt really inspired to actually meet y'all in the real world. Something that I was talking to them about and really opening up to them about was that it's just so nice to actually connect in a human space. Like, it would be so nice to actually have an in-person meditation and actually guide it together, go through those experiences together on the full or new moon. And that actually leads me to my next kind of update, life update, which is that I am going to be at Lightning in a Bottle, which is a music festival that happens in Southern California every year. This is the first time they're doing it, since COVID. And I kind of want to meet up with y'all, maybe around the time of the new moon, I don't know. But if by the off chance that you or somebody who might, watch my videos, I don't know, whoever actually wants to come would like to meet up at Lightning in a Bottle, hit me up on Instagram. But enough about me. With all of that said, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this video. So if you made it to the end, I invite you to comment 3 of those talking person emojis. It's like a person, and then there's like lines pointing out like they're talking out, because I feel like this time is really going to be about connection, communication, and bringing intentionality into that space, considering the transits right now with Mercury in retrograde, Mercury and Saturn, and all of those things. But there's going to be a lot of beautiful support within those realms as well. So really stepping into our power. And with all of that said, let me take a breath. I hope that you have a lovely new moon. I hope that this new moon can be a reminder to you that it is always okay to rest and reflect, and that in and of itself is productive. And that just like we see in the moon, just like we see in the seasons, you can have a fresh start whenever you want. And I'll leave you with my favorite quote, and that is, be gentle with yourself, because life is about the journey, not the destination. All right, peace.